Thank you for tuning in to the presentation about Reyna Silver. My name is Lauren Megaw. I am head of investor relations for Reyna Silver, and my job is essentially to translate geologists into English. Later, you'll hear from more of the technical team, but I'm going to dive into sort of the larger overview of the company. My background is I'm actually the daughter of Peter Megaw, so I grew up with these projects, these styles of exploration, and have seen the success that comes from taking what we refer to as an ore systems approach to exploring for high-grade district-scale projects. And when we mean high-grade district scale, what we're talking about is high enough grade that it can make money when silver prices are lower, but is big enough that it can survive multiple market cycles. And that's how you make the real generational wealth that can come out of these big projects. And we approach exploring from them not by going back and finding what little piece was left behind, but we're looking for the next big portion of the system or the next big system. Of course, I'll be making forward-looking statements. It's important to do your research and due diligence on this or any other investment that you are making. So, Reyna Silver. We have high-quality assets. We have 4 projects that fit through that high-grade district scale filter. And then on top of that, we have an exceptional team. The exploration team is led by Dr. Peter Megaw. He's the co-founder of Mag Silver. And even the geologists who are boots on the ground and have been part of this dynamic team for years, together they have a track record for making major discoveries. And that, in partnership with our CEO, Jorge Ramiro Monroy, and his expertise in capital markets, has provided us with the strong support, providing a balanced investor register between retail, institutions, and management. And that's allowed us to have access to funding because junior companies, our value is discovery driven. And discovery is made through the drill bit, and drill bit does require access to capital to move these projects forward. So we have 4 assets. 2 are in Mexico, that's Guigui and Batopilas. They actually originated with Mag Silver, and it was through our CEO's diligent work that we were able to bring those under the umbrella of Reyna Silver and really allow them to come into the limelight. The other 2 projects have been acquired since our IPO. That is Medicine Springs and Gryphon. And they're both in Nevada in one of the primo jurisdictions, which is Elko County. I've divided this presentation up between Batopilas, which is the historic native silver district, so Mexico's highest grade silver district. And because that is a different deposit type, we'll start there. Then we'll drop into what are called carbonate replacement deposits, or CRDs. These are big systems, incredibly economic, and we have 3 of what we think are the best projects out there for CRD discovery, including Guigui, which is the missing half of the Santa Eulalia mining district. So we're looking for the other portion of the CRD spectrum, which I'll dive into a little bit more later. The other 2 projects in Nevada, Medicine Springs, we think we have the full carbonate replacement deposit from source porphyry all the way out. And then we also have Gryphon, which we acquired back in September. And in that site, we have gold, silver, and critical metals in a over 10,000 hectare project. That thing, if we are correct, could be a real monster. And it's because we have these 4 projects that we are catalyst rich. We're able to have staggered news flow, move the projects forward, and if one really takes off, we can focus there. But on the other hand, if one of them is showing that it is not a Reyna Silver quality project, so that high grade, big scale, then we can defocus from that project as well. So, just to dive into what we've done and what we're currently working on. At Batopilas, we're currently taking the information that we acquired during the most recent drilling program where we found new high grade silver veins. We've made a big leap forward in our understanding of what creates these silver veins. And a lot of that was spurred on by our gold discovery there in 2022. So we did a rethink of the district, systematic sampling, structural work, geophysics, and that's what led us to this new portion. And that will also be what's driving the next set of targets, which is the Banda Este gold silver zone. At Guigui, this is where we're looking for the other half of the Santa Eulalia mining district. So there we found these features that tell us we're getting closer to the source, which is our exploration vector that we need to identify how to move into that more voluminous style mineralization. And what we're doing at Guigui currently is we did detailed geophysics. And now we're working with a group called Explore Tech that does AI optimized geophysics and target development. So we're moving that forward so that we can be strategic and diligent with our drilling dollars. Then at Medicine Springs, in the last 2 years during our reconnaissance program there, of the 9 structures that we've intersected during drilling, 7 of them have had high-grade silver mineralization. And in addition to that, over the summer, we did a large geophysics campaign. And what has really shown from that is these big conductive anomalies that suggest to us that we can narrow in on where the porphyry source is for Medicine Springs and use that moving forward. And that will be, we'll be working with Explore Tech as well at Medicine Springs before launching our 2024 exploration program there. And then we have Gryphon. And this project with the silver, the gold, and the critical metals came with a tremendous amount of historic data sets. And what we're doing now is integrating that into our system, putting the pieces together as part of our 2024 exploration program launch. And in part with that, we'll be doing a 43101 compliant technical report so we can discuss the prior drilling of over 10,000 meters and see why it is we're so excited. So the experts behind the team, what's driving these projects forward? We have our CEO, Jorge Ramiro Monroy. He's the founder and manager of Emerging Markets Capital, which is a mining-focused investment company based in Hong Kong. Our chairman is Peter Jones. He's actually the former CEO of Hudbay Minerals. So we have that expertise from a larger company as well. In addition to that, we have our exploration experts. So Dr. Peter Megaw, he's our chief technical advisor, co-founder of Mag Silver. He discovered Juanicipio, which will be one of the world's largest, highest grade primary silver producers. In addition to that, Platosa and Cinco de Mayo, 2 CRD districts. He did his PhD in the Santa Eulalia district, where our Guigui project is. In addition to him, we also have Mr. Douglas Kerwin. He's our senior technical advisor. He was the executive VP of Ivanhoe Mines, and he's most famous for the discovery of the Hugo Dummett ore body at Oyo Tolgoi, as well as additional work in Indonesia and around the world, really. One thing that I would mention here is our boots on the ground geos. So we have Rene Ramirez. He's our senior exploration manager. And in many ways, he's been Dr. Peter Megaw's right-hand man for the last 35 years in the exploration space. He was part of the mapping for hole 001 at Juanicipio, which hit the vein on the first hole for Mag Silver, as well as worked and moved forward the Platosa program, or the Platosa mine for Exelon Resources. So discovery through production there. In addition, we have Manuel Ruiz, a senior exploration geologist, and he was assisted in the discovery of the Cinco de Mayo CRD system for Mag Silver. So our boots on the ground geologists are serially successful in their own right and an incredible team. And we also have Ariel Navarro Herrera. He's our VP exploration, former exploration geologist for Pan American Silver. So a very strong technical team and a team that is well aware and experienced in the capital markets as well. So, diving into the fun part, we have Batopilas. This is Mexico's highest grade silver district. It's actually a historically native silver district. So the main ore type at Batopilas is actually native silver. And one thing I'd bring your attention to is this photo. That's 1 month's production in 1906. That's 350,000 ounces of fine silver. Each of those are 25 kilogram bars. And that's not an exceptional month. That's when the photographer was there. So there's 30 known veins that produced from 1632 to 1912. Over 300 million ounces of silver. And on the right here, you see an example of a native silver specimen. That's a pretty example of it. But that was the material that they crushed up, melted, and turned into the coins or bars that you see to the left here. It's one of the few mining districts where the major mineral is native silver. The history of the mine goes back to the Spanish out there looking for gold. They found this incredibly high-grade silver mineralization, and they went, okay, we can focus on that. Then in the 1850s, a group out of New York came in, and they said, the old-timers have been chasing these tight veins from surface that blow out into these big Oreshoots that I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. And then what if and then they would chase them down to depth. They came in below them, or at least that was the idea, and by building a tunnel called the Porfirio Diaz tunnel. And when they did that, they discovered that these Oreshoots kept going down. The mine closed during the Mexican Revolution, in part because many of the main investors were part of the colonial government. And so, as a result, hydroelectric dam was blown up, the mine went out of production, and the claims broke up. My father's group in the late 80s, 90s put the district back together, and that's what allowed it to go in. That's what allows us to now explore it on a larger scale. That's why Mag Silver got it, and now Reyna Silver gets to move this project forward. And one of the things that's really exciting to us is not only have we found new native silver veins, we haven't found one of the Oreshoots yet, but we found gold in a district where the Spanish went around looking for it, and here we are, the silver company, finding gold as well. So how these Oreshoots worked, and I'll let the technical guys go into this a little bit more later, but you would have these tight veins, and over the course of 3 to 5 meters, they blow out to be 3 to 5 meters wide, 30 to 80 meters long, with this native silver core that was 0.5 meters to 2 meters wide. And then it would taper back in, 30 to 80 meters, blow back out again and again. And that is what just this kind of mineralization, this kind of grades, that's what really gets a geologist out of bed in the morning and see if we can find more of these. So Reyna Silver's focus is on stepping out of the historically known mineralization and trying to figure out just how much bigger these systems can be. So in 2001, we stepped away from, where the Porfirio Diaz tunnel is, where you can see this purple sort of L shape. We stepped out over 1.5 kilometers to the northeast, following these structures that we'd identified doing mapping, as well as a trenching program. And when we did that trenching program, we discovered silver up to 42 kilograms in trench, as well as 3 grams gold. We went, that's interesting. We need to follow this up. And when we went up into the northeast, at hole 30, we intersected over 3.2 meters of over 700 grams silver and 3 grams gold. That included a zone of 0.2 meters of over 10.5 kilograms silver. And to us, that was the discovery of the Copriza zone. And as we continued to move to the northeast, we found increasing amount of gold. In hole 34, which is our furthest northeast hole, we intersected over 36 grams gold. And we actually did what's referred to as metallic screen assay, because we wanted to make sure that when we came to the market and said we have high grade gold mineralization, that we didn't put ourselves in a position where that turned out to be a nugget effect or something along those lines, that we could go to the market and say, this is actually what we have. And as we came back around toward the southwest following these structures, at hole 42A, we intersected over 3.5 meters of over 8 grams gold. And if you use a mineable cutoff of 2 meters of 8 grams gold, now we're talking almost 2x that. When you identify mineable widths and grades of an element that has not previously been seen in a district, you should pause your drilling program and figure out where that fits into the overall framework. And that's what we did. So we did a structural study. We did geophysics. We did a big sampling program. And what came out of that was a series of sort of stacked anomalies, as well as the discovery of the Banda Este silver gold zone in the southeast. And with these stacked anomalies, we decided that we wanted to test those in an area that we thought we had the highest chance for success, where we could move the program forward, have a better understanding what's driving those Oreshoots and what's creating them, see if we can create some consistency in our ability to identify where they are, and move the program forward from there when we go back to the area that's undercover. So at hole 57, our idea was we had these two big veins, Escritorio and Todos los Santos. The structural, geophysics, and sampling suggest that there should be something in between them. So we did a long angled hole, and in there we discovered 0.2 meters of over 6,400 grams silver. And what's particularly interesting here is that it displays the features that are associated with the mineralization as you get towards those blowout zones. So here on the left, you can see that particular portion of core. In the white with the gray, that's the native silver in calcite. But a particular interest is this black zone. That is what we refer to a breccia, or broken up rock. The white in there is that native silver in calcite. It's been, violently injected up in there. And the matrix, or the cement that's holding it together, is acanthite, which is silver sulfide. This is one of the features that tells you, okay, you're vectoring into one of those Oreshoots. Our next piece is to figure out which way we need to move to identify where another one of these Oreshoots are, and then see if we can use that and replicate that elsewhere. In addition to that, one of the big questions at Batopilas has been, if something didn't crop out on surface, is it still there to be found? And hole 58 is really proof in the pudding, as it were, for us that is a high possibility in Batopilas. Particularly, starting just 3 meters from surface, we hit 30 meters of silver mineralization, including 9 meters that runs over 616 grams silver, with consistent grade throughout that zone. And what this really highlights to us is that the year spent doing the systematic reiterative work that is important for making discovery has really paid off. And we can now implement this moving forward and further refining our understanding of how these work, and see if that leads us to discovery, especially when we're starting to hit our widest intercepts today. Now we're going to move into the carbonate replacement deposits. That's what our other 3 projects are. And in a lot of ways, this is one of the real strong suits of Reyna Silver, because of the depth of expertise that our team has in exploring for and finding carbonate replacement deposits of scale and grade. Dr. Peter Megaw's work has been focused on carbonate replacement deposits since his PhD work on the Santa Eulalia project, where our Guigui project is. And I'm going to take a moment to sort of explain a CRD, my best attempt in English, translating from geology. So what you see here is this pink. That's your intrusive. To be a porphyry, economically barren or productive, you typically associate these with copper and gold and molybdenum. Coming off that is acidic mineralized fluid, and that acidic mineralized fluid goes along pathways or routes, structures, bedding, fractures in the rock. And as it comes along, when it comes in contact with the magic host rock, the carbonate, hence the carbonate replacement reaction, you get an acid-base reaction, similar to like if you put the same thing. If you do one of those paper mache volcanoes, the vinegar and the baking soda, the pH changes, you get some bubbles, which creates porosity for the next pulse of mineralization, and the metals drop out. And this happens because it's following pathways that makes the mineralization continuous, because different metals are dropping out in different portions due to temperature and pH changes. You get zonation. And these things are also polymetallic. They're silver, lead, zinc, copper, gold. You get some critical metals in here as well. And they're that while simultaneously being what we refer to as metallurgically docile. The metallurgists love this material because what you're seeing is repeated pulses of mineralization. That's what makes these things bigger and bigger, higher and higher grade. And one of the beautiful aspects of carbonate replacement deposits is that the geology also, the reason they're attractive geologically is also what makes them attractive economically. So I want you to imagine that carbonate replacement deposits are like public transportation systems. So your source of the system here in pink, that's your porphyry. Think of that as being like your bus terminal. Surrounding that, you have your downtown area. That's what we refer to as the skarn, or the portion that is surrounding the porphyry that has been repeatedly bombarded with mineralization, heat, and a conducting zone. As you make your way further out, you get into the suburbs. And essentially what happens is each pulse of mineralization is like a bus leaving the terminal along a route. And different elements get out in different neighborhoods. So when you get to the skarn zone, your downtown area, you end up with higher copper, gold, lead, zinc. Your silver grade might be a little bit lower, but it's voluminous. As you make your way further out into the system, you get to the suburbs. So your silver grade goes way up. Lead, zinc, you get some rare elements as well. The systems are a little bit tighter, but you have that high grade. And then at the very end, that's when the elements that fell asleep on the back of the bus finally get kicked off. And those are our trace elements and our alteration halo that we can use to vector our way through and identify the system at surface. One of the components with these is that you're looking for a system that displays that the bus left the terminal many times fully loaded. And I will go into that a little bit later in terms of the features that we see and why we particularly like a couple of our projects based on that. The other component is when we talk about what a CRD continuum is. Essentially, the idea here is that historically we have broken these systems up into boxes. We've talked about the CRD chimney manto massive sulfides. We've talked about the skarn. We've talked about the porphyry, and we've looked at them largely based off of what crops out on surface. And instead, what we do is we're looking at this as a full system because it's a continuous system. And we can use different portions of it to find the missing pieces or the pieces that are undercover, hiding, or we know from the very nature of a carbonate replacement deposit has to be there. And this is particularly evident at our project Guigui in the Santa Eulalia district. So you're dealing with a district that produced 500 million ounces of silver, better part of 8 million tons combined lead zinc, average grade of 310 grams silver, combined 15% lead zinc. It is one of the world's largest carbonate replacement deposits. And yet that came from the distal portion or the massive sulfide portion of the system. That's the suburbs. Where the downtown area and the source have yet to be found in the Santa Eulalia mining district. And we believe that everything is pointed towards Guigui as being the source. And one of the reasons that mineralization has yet to be found is because it's hiding underneath pre-mineral volcanics, essentially a blanket that's covering it. That's what's displayed here in this buff colored zone. The deposit itself sits within this massive limestone unit. So limestone is carbonate. That's a lot of material to work with. And that's why the historic mineralization got so big. So this big, this almost spaghetti monster here to the left, that's actually a schematic onto a plane of the historic Santo Eulalia mining district West Camp. And one of the things that I would point out here is that when these things get big, they can get really big. So if you look at this chimney system here, which means vertical, those are two Eiffel towers stacked on top of each other. That mineralization came from somewhere. And the component that we're looking to do at Reyna Silver is identify where the source is. It's probably not an economically viable porphyry, but identify where the source is. We know where the historic mineralization is, and we can use those two against each other to find that more voluminous skarn mineralization. And so what we've done so far is at hole 28, we intersected skarn mineralization at depth. It's not the skarn mineralization we're necessarily looking for. We actually see that it's replacing an earlier stage of intrusive, which essentially means it tells us we're getting close, as well as seeing a series of zonations. I'll go into that a little bit more in a second. So from there, we needed to figure out which direction do we need to move. So we went 600 meters to the north, 770 meters to the northeast, over a kilometer out to the east. We hit at depth in all four of these holes. And what that gives us is variation to vector to identify which way we need to move towards that source. In addition, sitting about 450 to 750 meters above that skarn mineralization, we have these things called feeder bleeders. And they're essentially the features that, because they're continuous and because these systems are fractal almost, is when you can find something that's a tighter feature, you follow that to where it blows out in sort of one of these big chimney manto systems. So one of the components that's getting exciting is the potential for additional chimney mantos within Guigui itself. One way you can kind of think about this is Guigui has all the features and is a known large CRD program, or is part of a known large CRD district. So we're now seeing those feeder bleeder structures, because how many big cities have you been in that only have one or two bus routes? In addition to that, we already know from drilling that we have 1,200 meters of one of the most fabulous host rocks for carbonate placement deposits in history. And then on top of that, we're starting to see the zonation in skarn that's telling us which way to move towards that source as we vector into there, so we can work those two ends against each other and find the skarn mineralization. So we're moving forward with this major district and making leaps and bounds in terms of our better understanding. And what we're doing now is we've done this big geophysics program across the area. And we're working with a group called Explore Tech that focuses on AI optimization of geophysics. Because typically when you look at geophysics, you get, your singular best case anomaly. But that takes in a lot of considerations of, okay, I've just selected this as my best feature and this is the most likely, and it ends up with stacked biases. So instead, what we're doing here is, instead of getting the singular best case scenario, we get 140 of the best case scenarios, and those get stacked on top of each other. And then the next stage of the program is to identify a drill hole that intersects as many of those high probability cases. How can we design that so we can test it and make the best use of our geophysics? It's exciting to be working on something that's so cutting edge. It's a program that was developed and funded by Cobalt as part of PhDs out of Stanford University. So we're excited to move forward with this company. working at Guigui as well. So if that wasn't enough, we also have our 2 projects in Nevada. We've got Medicine Springs. This is where we think we have the full CRD spectrum. So from that porphyry all the way out to the most distal portion. And everything about this project tells us that it has the potential for being big and high grade. So this is the checklist, 13 of the key features that are associated with the big high grade systems. You've got to be in an area that's got a porphyry. If you don't have a bus terminal, if you don't have a source for the system, you can't get a CRD. On top of that, we need to see that there's a big section of that magic host rock, that carbonate, because that's what provides the room to grow for the system to get large. That's where we get our scale from. We also want to see high grade. We're not looking towards looking at something that's low grade. We're not here to mess around. We're looking for the high grade mineralization, gold, lead, zinc, copper, the indicators that tell us this is a juicy system or a potent system. The rest of these features are what tell us that the bus left the terminal many times fully loaded. We want a long-lived system. We need multiple pulses of mineralization. That's what makes these things big. That's what makes these things high grade. And Medicine Springs shows 11 out of the 13 key features that say it looks like a significant CRD. And what we've done so far with reconnaissance drilling is identify how well mineralized the system is. So of the 9 structures that we've intersected in drilling so far, 7 of them have had high grade mineralization. We've got a 75% silver hit rate. This early in CRD exploration is incredible. And, on our very first hole, we were actually testing to see whether or not we had the scale and we had the high grade that made it a Reyna silver quality project. So that first hole was nearly 800 meters long. Everything that you see here on the right side, that's a section of it. Everything that you see in blue, that's carbonate. So check, room to grow. In addition to that, in the first hole, we also intersected over 2.4 meters of over a kilo silver. So this indicates that we're dealing with a potent system. In addition to that, what we did is we stepped out 1.75 kilometers to the southwest from hole 1. And there we hit again with 7.4 meters of over 180 grams silver. And then what we've done this year is bracketed that in terms of width. So hole 7, we hit high grade mineralization, 1.3 meters of over 300 grams silver with 11.9% zinc. We then stepped out 550 meters to where hole 6 was, where we hit 2.1 meters of over 220 grams silver. So we're showing scalability, we're showing it's a potent system. And in addition to that, what we have is recent geophysics. And what's particularly exciting to us about this geophysics is how it lines up with the geochemical work that we see on surface. So at Medicine Springs, we have these features called jasperoids. And jasperoids are essentially exhaust features coming off of a CRD. And they essentially provide us a window to what's going on at depth. And when we did a systematic study of these jasperoids, what became apparent was a copper, lead, zinc, silver zonation pattern. And we're seeing up to 1,200 grams silver in the jasperoids, in those exhaust features, as well as this copper component moving towards the northeast. The geophysics also shows us a similar pattern as well. So when you're getting stacked structural work, geophysics, and geochem, we're particularly interested in what that geophysics anomaly means, whether that's potentially an indicator of the source. And one of the things that's interesting about Medicine Springs is that while the Mexican porphyries are typically barren economically, in Nevada and Utah and Arizona, the porphyries that are associated with the CRDs, they can be productive as well for copper, gold, moly. And, For us, it is an exploration vector to identify where the source is, but there is also that blue sky potential at Medicine Springs, dovetailing with that exploration vector. So we're excited to put that together. And in addition to that, we have this feature, this geophysics feature here. And associated with that geophysics feature is our highest grade silver samples. So it's surrounded by zones of 900 to 1200 grams silver associated with the structures that are associated with this particular geophysics anomaly. So we're looking forward to working with both of those geophysics anomalies, putting those together and see if we can identify strategic drill targets for a 2024 program there. So we also have Gryphon, and this is with joint venture with our sister company, Reyna Gold. And there we have gold, silver, and critical metals too. The project's over 10,000 hectares. And really what Gryphon is an example of when the market is where it is currently. That's when the truly great projects pop loose. And when the presentation, when the opportunity presents itself, you seize it. And that's what we've done at Gryphon. The Gryphon story is largely that for the last 50 years, Nevada has been focused on the gold mineralization because of the Carlin style and Carlin type mineralization. Big, shallow to increasing grade at depth gold deposits that are company makers for things like Barrick. And Gryphon lies between two of the biggest gold mega districts, the Carlin Trend to the northeast and the Battle Mountain Eureka Trend to the southwest. And because of this, and because of the extensive gold mineralization we see at Gryphon, the focus on this project has shallowly been on the gold. However, Nevada is also the silver state, and it is partially the silver state because of the CRD silver mines that were in Nevada and were the focus historically, particularly something like the Eureka District, which is 72 kilometers south of us, where I-80 Gold has gone in underneath where, previous miners were going after the gold mineralization. They said, that's right. Eureka started off as a high-grade silver, lead, zinc deposit with a gold kicker. That's what made it special. They then found the Carlin mineralization on top of it. Could there be more of this polymetallic mineralization below? And there they've been finding huge carbonate replacement deposit mineralization, really moving forward. And the relationship between these two different mineralization types. We're 72 kilometers to the north of them, and we have many of the similar features. In addition to that, you see that same combination north of us at the Railroad District as well. So why do we like this? We're near Eureka. We're between these big trends. The focus on it has been gold, in part because of the extensive gold mineralization. And yet we see a tremendous amount of silver, lead, zinc, copper, as well as critical metals like nickel and vanadium. This project came with a tremendous amount of existing data. We have geophysics, mag, grav, 39 kilometers of IP, CSAMT, 17 kilometers of NSAMT. That gives us a lot of material to work with to better sort out our targets. On top of that, we have the vendors curated 23 core holes. So we have the existing core, which we're now working our way through, and we'll be doing strategic reassaying so that we can put that into a 43101 compliant technical report. And then we'll be able to talk in more detail about what they historically were intersecting at Gryphon and why we're particularly excited about this project. In addition to that, in the 90s, because of the Carlin type mineralization here, there's 133 RC coals. And what this provides us with the opportunity to do is identify potentially major structures. And what we already see in the data, in the sampling, is that we have these long-lived, deep structures that were plumbing for repeated styles of mineralization. And in particular, we see that with the CRD mineralization. CRD, Carlin mineralization, the mineralized fluid doesn't know that, it's supposed to be one thing or the other. The plumbing is the plumbing. And what this allows us to do is look at this incredible CRD district where we're in the right location. We're at the top of the carbonate sequence. We're seeing high-grade silver. We're seeing the evidence, just doing the due diligence process of a long-lived multi-pole system. And by tackling and using that ore systems approach on the CRD mineralization, that can provide us with a better opportunity to understand the gold mineralization and potentially also that critical metals as well. So putting the pieces together here at Gryphon and using that to potentially make a significant discovery in Nevada. The same way that we're using that ore systems approach to look at Batopilas, where we found gold. And that gold's using the same structures as the silver. And that's allowing us to make those big leap forward in terms of how we're looking at Batopilas. At Guigui, where we're using cutting edge AI optimization of the geophysics in part with our understanding of the Santa Eulalia district in particular, but the recent significant step outs in the drilling, putting those pieces together and honing in on that source. Or Medicine Springs, where we think that we have the whole system and everything is telling us that it is a potent system. And we're now using the geophysics to identify where the source is so we can work those two ends against each other. As well as at Gryphon, where we've got that CRD mineralization, that gold mineralization, and the critical metals. We're going to be busy. We've got a lot of projects moving forward, but we think that we have 4 significant chances to really move Reyna Silver forward. So thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you, Valpal, for having us.
Jorge, could you tell the audience about yourself and your career?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Jasper, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about our company. And to tell a little bit about my background, I'm originally from Mexico, and I've been in the mining industry for a good chunk of my career, close to 13 years now. And I actually started, after I did my MBA, I started actually in the junior mining space in Mongolia. And it was a time where there was a lot of activity there. You might remember Robert Friedland had made the Oyu Tolgoi discovery. And there were a lot of opportunities to do financings because at the time, people were very excited about the China story. It was a time where China growing at 15% a year. The thinking was there's just not enough commodities in the world to sustain that development. And having had an opportunity to have let's call it a front row seat to seeing what happened in China and the incredible transformation of the country. You would come to a city in 2001, 2002, and then you come back to it 5-6 years later, and it was a small village that all of a sudden had skyscrapers and millions of people every month moving from villages to cities, and just an incredible amount of commodities that generated. It made me realize, professionally and as an investor, that this is a macro trend that was going to continue for a long, long time. So it's been an incredible adventure so far. Things haven't played out exactly the way that I thought. I remember back in 2009, 2010, I really thought, gold and silver are going to go, to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and surprise, surprise. But through the years, given the fact that I'm Mexican, I started going back to Mexico and just realizing the incredible wealth of the mineral wealth that's there. And through those trips and explorations, I had the opportunity of meeting Dr. Peter Megaw, who, as you might know, is the co-founder of Mag Silver. And it really was through his encouragement and his guidance that I had the opportunity of founding Reyna Silver. And basically the main premises behind starting Reyna Silver was the fact that when I looked at the silver space, I quickly realized that there aren't that many silver deposits. There aren't that many silver deposits that have enough grade. And at the time when I started Reyna Silver back in 2017 as a private company, pretty much anything Jasper that you can think of was up for sale. And I went to consult with Peter Megaw and asked him, Peter, what would you recommend for an entrepreneur like myself to focus on as far as silver goes? And he said to me, look, there's two things you can do. One is there's plenty of silver deposits that are low grade that people have tried to make them work in previous cycles. And sure, you can take one of those. But what I would encourage you to do is there's so much exploration potential, so much yet to be discovered in Mexico and in North America in general. I would, go for some of these high potential assets and, and then just go and make the discovery. So that's a little bit a short version of my background.
Excellent, thank you. And I mean, so you're an investor with influence in more industries than just mining. How does it benefit for you to have a sort of non-mining background or a foot in other industries?
Yeah, at this point, I'm gonna say, I've been so consumed by mining for especially the past, like say 6-7 years. I mean, at first, of course, it brought sort of a fresh outlook to the industry, but I would say more than bringing other industry. I think the the fact that I've done the majority of my professional career in Asia, I think that has had a deeper influence. It's a little bit of what I was telling you. Like here in Asia, you see that, I think in the West, we still think of commodities as an asset class that's a little bit detached from reality somehow. But when you go to all these countries and you see the tremendous growth, when you see how key commodities are to the aspirations of developing countries, then you start realizing just what a real asset class it is. And regardless of the market moves and regardless of the commodity price, I mean, this is real. The urbanization is real, the growth of populations are real. And so from that perspective, I think I've come at the sector from a slightly different approach than perhaps North American people in general would look at.
Thank you. And so, how and why did you put Reyna Silver together?
It was the as an entrepreneur, I had already started a number of companies, and I've always been fascinated by silver. It's an incredible commodity. As a Mexican, it has defined so much of our history. Where as Mexico is one of the biggest historic producers. And Jasper, when you go to the mines in Mexico, it's really incredible because, I mean, I think it's hard to appreciate just how much silver the Spanish took from Mexico starting in the 1500s. Just to give an example, if you start a new project and stake ground especially in the north of Mexico, you can take 2,000-3,000 hectares, and within that you can find 2 dozen historic mines. Many of them would have been from the 1700s, but some of them from more modern days. So you can think about it as the Spanish doing helping you with your basic exploration for years and years. You can learn a lot from chasing the old workings. One of the things that we continually realized is just how high the grade was. So I really became fascinated, specifically within silver. I'm fascinated by the concept of discoveries. Having had the opportunity to spend time with Peter Megaw and seeing how a lot of these discoveries get made based out of geological models, and it takes a tremendous amount of skills and expertise. So that part to me has always been tremendously exciting.
Thank you, and I fully agree with you. But I mean, how large of an equity stake do you have in Reyna?
So I own about 11 million shares, so roughly 7% of the company. I'm the founder of the company. I started the company from day one. It's a little bit different from the way that other Canadian companies have been put together, just in the sense that for the first 2 years or so of the company, I was the only investor. So I did the deal with Max Silver in 2018, took the project forward with my own capital as much as I could. It was obviously a difficult market. And I basically didn't bring external capital until close to the time we went public in 2020. So and I've participated in the majority of financing since the company has been public.
Super. And so, how did you build a team at Reyna?
So initially, as part of the deal that we did with Max Silver, we were allowed to have Dr. Peter Megaw as our main technical advisor. Keep in mind, Max Silver is still a shareholder of the company. I believe they still own about 7% of the company. And there were a group of geologists that had been working for these projects for Max Silver basically from the very beginning. So I think you already mentioned you spoke to Rene. Rene, for instance, he's been full-time with us from day one. And he's the person who helped Peter map the original Juanicipio discoveries. He is, in his own right, a very successful geologist who's made a number of discoveries, mostly by Peter's side, but doing a lot of the sort of day-to-day work that's obviously so important as part of a team. So we inherited a team that's led by Rene, another gentleman, Manuel, who is actually was the main geologist at Cinco de Mayo, the other CRD discovery from Max Silver. So we've been very lucky from day one to really have a top-notch team on the ground.
Thank you, Peter, for being here today. So, Peter, could you tell us who you are and walk us through your career?
I'm an exploration geologist. I've been exploring for about 45 years, a high percentage of that in Mexico, but also a fair amount in the Western U.S., Canada, South America, and a few odds and sods of other places, Turkey and Eastern Europe. Got fascinated with carbonate replacement deposits back when I was a volcanologist, long before I did my doctorate. Fell in love with the Santa Eulalia district where Reyna's Guigui project is, and just basically have never looked back. Got fascinated with the regional controls on why the big deposits are where they are, and have used that as a basis for exploration very successfully in Mexico and also now in the Western U.S.
Could you tell us just a little bit about, because it's an important part for Reyna, we'll come to that in a minute. But yeah, you founded MAG. You also discovered the Juanicipio deposit. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, MAG was an outgrowth of, at that time, about 15 years exploration work that we had done within our private Mexican company and our U.S. and Mexican consulting group. We had recognized three main properties, Juanicipio being one of them, but also Guigui and Batopilas were the three properties that we started MAG with. And this is back in 2000. Well, we started brainstorming it in 2001. We got serious about it in 2002. There was no interest in mining exploration projects at the time, and we floated MAG in early 2003. We were one of the first companies to come out just before or just as there was a big revival in exploration interest. So MAG was the beneficiary of millions of dollars worth of exploration work done on the three projects by sort of in fits and starts with other companies. Juanicipio was the one we were able to start drilling first. We were very fortunate there. We hit on the first drill hole. And that was off to the races. And ultimately, it was the success of Juanicipio that led to the Guigui and Batopilas projects. I don't want to say fall by the wayside, but they got put on the back burner because the focus was so much on getting Juanicipio, and fully justifiably getting Juanicipio into production. And so Juanicipio and Batopilas and Guigui became available. Jorge Ramiro Monroy, the president and CEO and founder of Reyna Silver, had done a lot of work for us in the Orient, introducing us to investors and things like that for a number of years. So when he went to MAG and said, do you have some properties that I could acquire from you? Mag said, yes, these 2 properties would be available. And that was where Reyna came from.
Excellent. And how did you get involved with Reyna?
Well, I got involved with Reyna because I had done a lot of the marketing with Jorge in the Orient, but primarily because my group and me had generated those 2 projects. Jorge said, can I have some of Peter's time? And Mag said, yes, that's fine. He can spend 15-20% of his time on these projects. Because Mag was a major shareholder and still is a major shareholder of Reyna, it was to their benefit to have me continue helping out the project. And of course, I then immediately brought Rene Ramirez into the picture. Rene and I had worked together at Platosa. He and I made the big discovery there. He and I did all the mapping and field work at Municipio together. So once we had Guigui and Batopilas under control, and he's based in Chihuahua, so he could practically see Guigui from his house, he was the obvious person to bring in with years of experience working with me on CRDs.
As we already have alluded to, you have an impressive track record of making discoveries. Cinco de Mayo, you have Platosa, you have, of course, also the Municipio vein. So, but which one of them are you most proud of?
That's almost like asking which is my favorite child, but not quite. Because I think Cinco de Mayo has to be the one that I'm proudest of, because it was a completely blind discovery made based on years of systematic regional exploration and recognizing that there had to be a big deposit in that neighborhood somewhere, and being able to pick up the property and actually follow through and make that discovery was a major intellectual accomplishment, I think. Obviously, Municipio is the most satisfying because it is now one of the world's biggest silver mines, and that was made by rethinking the Fresnillo district, which was very important. But the pieces that you needed to make the Municipio discovery were visible. There's outcrop there that you could work with. Cinco de Mayo, there was practically no outcrop. So it really was a combination of a geologic model, some geophysics, some drilling, success with drilling, and then continuing to build on that success.
Excellent, thank you. And I mean, Reyna's perhaps most important asset is the intellectual capacity of the team, including you. So, I mean, you worked with several of Reyna's geologists, including the exploration manager, Rene. So, could you tell us a little bit about the team, especially the exploration team?
Well, it's the team in Mexico is composed of geologists I've worked with for years. I mean, I've known Rene since he was a student in the geology department at the University of Chihuahua. We worked together off and on for many years, probably more or less full-time together for the last 25 years. So I've learned a lot working with him. He's learned a lot working with me. And then he's built the team in Chihuahua with Jorge Carrillo and Manuel, who has worked for Cascabel for many years. He did a lot. Manuel, who was running the Batopilas project, ran the drilling at Cinco de Mayo. So we had 6 rigs out there at one point, and that kept Manuel pretty busy. So, and Ricardo, who works with him at Batopilas, the 2 of them were involved with projects, the Salamandra project for Mexico outside Durango City 10, 12 years ago. So these are all guys who have got a lot of rocks under their boots, and a lot of those rocks that were under their boots were under my boots at the same time. So they're smart guys. They know what they're doing, and it's delightful to be able to bring them into the projects in the U.S. A lot of the Medicine Springs had to be done with contract geologists because of the timing and the fact that there just wasn't the right person available to run that project on the open market. So we found the right guys to do that through Big Rock Exploration, but it's different working with contract people from having your own team. And so the goal for Gryphon's Summit will be to build our own team, working with some of the people who have worked with the vendors for decades. And Jeffrey Abbott, who is the president of Gryphon Gold, which is whom we optioned the Gryphon Summit project from. I've known Jeffrey since the early 80s. He actually did carbonate replacement exploration back in the 70s at the Deer Trail property where Mag Silver is now, back when he was with Phelps Dodge. And Jeffrey brought me into Gryphon Summit a couple of times looking at the CRD component of things rather than the Carlin Gold. So again, there's a team that I go back with a very long time. So they're people I'm comfortable working with, good, talented, knowledgeable, smart people.
So, Rene, could you tell us who you are and walk us through your career?
Okay, well, my name is Rene Ramirez. I am a bachelor engineering geologist. I am Mexican. I studied at Universidad Autónoma de Chihuahua. It's in a state of Chihuahua, who is north of Mexico, bordered with U.S. And I graduated in 1986, a lot of time ago. So in that time, I met coincidentally to Peter Megaw at Santa Eulalia mining district. He was doing his PhD work thesis, and a friend of mine, it was my teacher in that time, is Peter's friend as well. So we met in a supper on the side, and I met Peter Megaw. So the life taken us for separated ways at that time. But after 8 years, we considered again. Peter founded an exploration services company named Minera Cascabel, and he was hired me to be part of the Minera Cascabel in that time. So generally, I can tell you I have more than 28 years working steady with Peter Megaw in Minera Cascabel. Obviously, there's been a lot of success cases in exploration beside Peter, and one of the biggest one and the more important were Juanicipio project discovery. Juanicipio is an epithermal vein, silver, lead, and zinc project in Zacatecas, Mexico. That discovery was done in the backyard of the Fresnillo company, who has been mining out in that property for a long time. And Peter and I did all the geological mapping in a neighbor claim, and we found very interesting things that probably the people at Fresnillo take beside, because obviously they are pretty busy exploring all the huge mining district they have. But at the end of the day, Peter and I spent a year and a half doing the geological job, and find the continuation of the Fresnillo veins to our claim. And after doing some geophysics, we decided to drill the first 7 holes, and we hit with the second hole. We hit the vein, who after we realized it was a continuation of the Fresnillo's vein mineralization. So right now After 20 years, Juanicipio is working fully, mining out 4,500 tons per day, and with a tremendous silver and even some gold grades into it. And well, it was one of the first discovery beside Peter.
So, Lauren, could you tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about your career?
Yeah, so I grew up with my father, Dr. Peter Megaw, coming back from the fields, coming back from places like Batopilas and Guigui and Juanicipio. And he would bring mineral samples back. And we'd sit down and we'd unwrap them and we'd talk about where they came from. And that's what really spurred my love for mineralogy and geology. And that's what took me off to school, where I studied geology at Stanford, and then also in conjunction with working for a mineral sales company, which provided me with the opportunity to do a survey of the Hunan area, particularly around Chenzhou in China. And now I have the opportunity to work for Reyna Silver. Stumbled into doing the investor relations portion of it. And I'm really enjoying being part of both the technical team as well as the corporate communication side, because we feel it's important to explain these things to the best of our ability and increase the confidence of our investors.
Perfect, thank you. And so, could you walk us through Reyna's ownership with regards to so both the institutional and retail split, and also who are your largest shareholders?
So, Jorge owns 11. Our CEO owns 11 million shares. Board and management in total is around 11% of the company. Mag Silver owns just over 7% of Reyna Silver. In addition to that, our biggest institutional shareholder is Sprott. Then we also have Commodities Discovery, as well as a series of high net worth individuals, both out of Australia and Southeast Asia. One of the amazing parts about having a CEO based out of Hong Kong is that Jorge is able to interact with our about over 40% of our shareholders are based out of Southeast Asia and Australia. So his role in many ways is interacting with our major shareholders in that hemisphere, and my role is interacting and having consistent communication with our Western Hemisphere investors.
3 of Reyna's 4 projects are carbonate replacement deposits, CRDs. Could you tell us what is a carbonate replacement deposit and what characterizes it?
Okay, so a carbonate replacement deposit, as the name implies, involves replacement of carbonate rocks by minerals, metallic minerals that come from fluids from an intrusive rock. So you have a body of magma, which is very acid, and it kicks off fluids that contain all of the metals that we care about, plus a bunch of other water and other volatiles. Those react with the carbonate rock. So it's like when you were a kid and you dropped vinegar into baking soda. That's a neutralization reaction. So the acid, which is the vinegar, reacts with the base, which was the baking soda, and you get that nice fizzing reaction. And that's pretty much what's going on here. The limestone or dolomite, the carbonate rock, is the baking soda, and the ore fluid that comes off that intrusion is the acid, like the vinegar. And in the process of what happens is that fluid is neutralized by the reaction with the carbonate rock. It dissolves a tiny, tiny little void, little open space, into which the sulfide minerals deposit instantly. And so this is a repeated process. So the fluids eat their way through the carbonate rock, reacting with it and leaving behind the sulfide minerals that we care about. And so it very faithfully replaces the carbonate, and it very faithfully retains the textures in the original carbonate rock. So if there's a fossil, for example, that gets replaced by sulfides. And sometimes in the ores, you can actually recognize the fossils that were in that limestone that were replaced by the mineralizing fluid. And so you can think of these things as sort of eating their way through the carbonate rocks along whatever fractures and irregularities there are in the carbonate rocks that let the fluids move through them. And sometimes those fluids can move 5 or 6 kilometers away from that intrusive center. So if you look at the model that's shown here, that hot pink blob that's in the lower center, that's the intrusive body. So that's a body of magma that comes from deep in the crust. It's very hot. It's full of metals. It's full of fluids. That comes into shallow levels in the crust where it encounters, in this case, carbonate rocks. That's that teal unit that you see running diagonally across the diagram. And close to the intrusion, you get what we call skarn, which is a high temperature alteration of calc-silicates. You might have heard of garnets and things like that. Those are a very common skarn mineral. And then the sulfide-bearing fluids come in after that. So they replace the calc-silicates and they replace the limestone outboard of it. So to explore for one of these things, if you start out at the manto end where it's yellow, where the silver grades are highest, mineralization is continuous from wherever you find it all the way back to that intrusion. And depending on where you are, that intrusion could in itself be a major ore deposit. It could be a porphyry copper deposit, for example. And the best example of that is Bingham Canyon in Utah, which is one of the world's best porphyry copper systems. And it is surrounded by skarn and mantos, or the sulfide replacements in the carbonates. They mined the high-grade replacement mineralization for decades before they ever started to mine the porphyry copper. In Mexico, we're probably not, at Guigui, we're probably not going to see a productive porphyry just because the other deposits like it in the U.S. in Mexico, where you've found the intrusion, it's not a productive porphyry. But for both Gryphon and Medicine Springs, they are in porphyry copper country. So there's a very good possibility that there is a productive porphyry associated with either or both of Medicine Springs and Gryphon.
What minerals are typically found in a CRD?
Okay, well, CRDs, like most sulfide deposits, or most ore deposits actually, are dominated by iron sulfide, pyrite. So that's just because iron is such an abundant element in the Earth's crust. But the minerals that we care about are galena, which is lead sulfide, sphalerite, which is zinc sulfide, chalcopyrite, which is copper iron sulfide. And when you're lucky, you get things like acanthite, which is silver sulfide. But usually the silver deposits in or around the galena with the lead sulfide. So those 3 or 4 minerals are the principal metallic minerals that we care about. And so you find that mineralization, and typically in a CRD that's very concentrated. The ore bodies consist of nothing but massive sulfides. So there's very little gangue. Less than 5% is non-economic, non-sulfide minerals. So quartz and calcite and fluorite and some common things like that. But the majority of the ore body, 95% plus, is just going to be a mass of that galena, sphalerite, pyrite, and chalcopyrite. And because of how the system works, CRDs are the product of a multi-phase, multi-pulse system. And as each wave of fluids moves through the previously formed mineralization, it dissolves it a little bit and then reprecipitates it. So you wind up with very coarse sulfide minerals. And the metallurgists absolutely love this because it's very coarse. It's very easy to separate the galena to make a lead con, and the sphalerite to make a zinc concentrate, and the chalcopyrite to make a copper concentrate. And you can make very clean, very high recovery concentrates from these ores.
Excellent. And then these deposits could help to vector into sometimes copper porphyry deposit or copper gold porphyry deposits.
Correct. Well, the systems tend to be zoned from a copper center, whether that's a productive porphyry or just copper skarn, but close to the intrusion is where you get the most copper, or in the intrusion. And then as you work your way out, you go through a zone where zinc is dominant, then a zone where lead is dominant with silver, and then a zone where silver is dominant. And sometimes beyond that, you get a zone where manganese and silver are dominant. So the proportion of the metals from varies depending on how close you are to the source, but all of the metals are present at some level from the source all the way to the outside. But you can use that zoning and the change of the dominance of a different metal or different mineral carrying that metal to do what we call vectoring, which is just figuring out which direction you go to get back to the source.
Okay. And you think that Gryphon and Medicine Springs could potentially host a porphyry?
Yes, they are in a part of the world where there are a number of very good porphyry copper deposits. So it is a possibility. It has to be the right age, but there are porphyry coppers there. Where Guigui is, there aren't any porphyry coppers. So I would expect to see copper grades go up in the skarns at Guigui, and we see that in the drilling already. But I don't expect that we're going to have a porphyry there.
No, but that makes full sense. And just the CRD could be highly economic. The size of the price is more than enough. So but for that.
But there's another interesting point that comment brings up, which is that carbonate, the CRD portion is very high grade. So you're talking combined grades of 15 to 20% lead and zinc and 10 ounces plus silver, 350 grams silver, sometimes 500 grams silver. So for a unit volume of mineralization, the value is very high. And for a junior company, that's a legitimate target. Porphyry, on the other hand, for a porphyry to make economic sense, you need 1 billion tons of 0.5% copper. That's what gets a major interested. And to drill off 1 billion tons is a lot of drilling. A junior company shouldn't be in the business of trying to prove up a porphyry. It's fine for a junior to find one, but you need to bring in a major to work with on it because they've got the pockets that are deep enough to pay for that. A junior will dilute themselves to nothing if they try to drill off a porphyry copper. So we focus on the high grade. We try to follow that high grade back towards the porphyry. And if we find a porphyry that looks potentially economic, you make a joint venture with somebody and let them carry it forward. In the meantime, hanging on to the high grade stuff around.
Makes sense. But then just for the viewers to get a sense of what could be the size of a CRD.
Big CRDs or important CRDs sort of start at 10 million tons and they go to 100 million tons, maybe 150 million tons in the sulfide zone, in the replacement zone. Then you can get several 100 million tons in the skarn, close to the intrusion. And then if you're in association with a productive porphyry, like Bingham Canyon, multiple billions of tons of 0.5% plus copper. So they can be very, very large systems. And that's what you want. Exploration is difficult enough that you don't want to find, there's a famous saying that the worst thing that can happen to you is that you find a small deposit because you keep thinking there's got to be something there and there isn't, which is why when you showed that checklist when I was talking about CRDs, there's features we recognize that are characteristic of big CRD systems that we've developed this checklist by looking at hundreds of examples, big ones and little ones. And we know what the characteristics are of the big ones. So we look for those features as soon as we can to say, okay, we're in a big system. Or if you can't check many of those boxes, you go, next, I'm going to go look at some other project. So that's all legwork that's done before any investor hears about it. I mean, we're rejecting dozens of project opportunities all the time because they just don't fit either the economic threshold that we like to see, or they don't show the signs of being a big system. Once we see something that checks off a number of those boxes, then we go, okay, this one's worth exploring.
Before we speak more about CRDs, I would actually like to speak about your project, your only project that's not a CRD, carbon replacement deposit, Batopilas, or Batopilas, sort of my pronunciation. Could you describe Batopilas?
Batopilas is an absolutely fascinating district. It's because the principal mineral that's been mined historically there is native silver. So crystallized native silver is the principal ore mineral at Batopilas. So you can think of the ore bodies as like a pad of steel wool. Brillo would be a good example in this country. I don't know what brands of steel wool you get other places, but that's basically what the ore body looked like. And that mineralization ran into the multiple percents of silver. People don't normally think of a percent of silver. You go, oh, well, it's only a percent. That doesn't seem like much. A percent of silver is 20 kilograms of silver per ton. And so you're starting to talk these ore bodies that are crystallized native silver. You're talking ore bodies that are running 50 to 100 kilograms plus per ton of silver. That's incredibly high grade. At $25 an ounce and about 30 ounces per kilogram, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars a ton in the mineralization. So you don't have to find huge ore bodies. And the ore bodies at Batopilas are not necessarily huge. They're not small. They're half a meter to maybe 2 meters wide, and they're 50 to 80 meters on level, but they're 350 meters down dip. And so historically what they did was they chased these little calcite veins that are only this wide, and over a distance of 3 meters or 4 meters, it would go from 1 centimeter wide to a vein 2 meters wide, essentially filled with native silver. And just the potential for finding new bodies like this is so good, because historically that's all they ever did was they just followed these with direct headings, and they whenever one opened up, well, that was good. But we call that stope and hope. So you just keep digging, hoping you're going to break into something. We're taking a more modern approach to the exploration there, trying to use some of the characteristics of the silver to find more mineralization. And before I get too far off track, I should mention that one of the things we found early on at Batopilas was that it has a gold overprint. So we have a plumbing system, a series of fractures that the silver mineralization used early. And then at some later time, and we don't yet know how much later, at some later time, that same system of cracks was reopened and gold mineralization was introduced to the cracks from the other end. So if you could think of it as a plumbing system, you've got, at one point, the plumbing is working one direction with silver, and then the opposite direction is working with gold. So you have the superimposition of the gold on top of the silver. And it was recognizing that, which gold had never been important at Batopilas historically. So this got us very excited, especially when you're talking 2 meters of 12 grams gold. That's more than mineable. So there's potential there is not just for the silver, it's also there for the gold. And it's in some ways, and I'm not going to get a little off track here, but it's analogous to what we think is happening at Gryphon, in that in Gryphon we have an early carbonate replacement style of mineralization that is then overprinted by Carlin type gold mineralization. So we have an early lead zinc silver superimposed with gold on top of it. So there's other deposits like that. You've heard a lot about I-80 and what they're doing in Eureka and the railroad mine, which is due north of us, where they see the same thing historically. The combination of two different events happening in the same place can do some really interesting things to your economics, because you're no longer dependent on whatever you'll make from the silver, lead, and zinc. You've got a gold sweetener on top of it, or look at it the other way around. You've got the gold, and then you have all these other metals. And typically CRDs are going to have things like zinc in them, which is a critical metal these days. Some of them have a lot of manganese, which is also a critical mineral. So I love polymetallic deposits just because they do such interesting things to the overall economics. To go back to Batopilas, what we're doing, the mines basically shut down during the Mexican Revolution in 1913, and the district just sort of disintegrated into a bunch of small claims. We were able to consolidate the land package in the district and take this modern exploration approach to this phenomenally high-grade system. It's similar to Kongsberg, which you've heard of in Norway, which actually created the wealth that supported the Norwegian government for 100 plus years, but a very similar kind of deposit. The cobalt silver district in Canada is also in many ways very similar to Batopilas. So extremely high grade, not necessarily the easiest exploration targets, but we think we have finally figured out. Our last round of drilling at Batopilas was based on a year's worth of study of the structure and the geochemical zoning and all of the features that we'd put together. And we hit some pretty strong widths of mineralization and some pretty high grade mineralization in the last round of drilling. So pretty exciting to get back and follow up on some of those things.
Thank you. And by the way, just a quick follow-up. So these Oreshoots of native silver, they could be 2 meters wide, but how long, or how could the lateral length?
30 to 80 meters, typically on level.
2 meters.
2 meters wide, 30 to 80 meters. But then the long axis is 350 meters. So shaped like a flattened banana. If you think of a banana as 350 meters long and 2 meters wide, but smashed flat so that it's 30 to 80 meters.
But was your thesis that there could be similar Oreshoots with gold?
No, the geometry, we would expect the geometry of the gold to be quite different. I would again expect it to be in what we call Oreshoots, but I would expect for the gold that it will be more like conventional epithermal vein systems. So wherever the structure takes a wiggle with movement on the structures, I mean, if you start off with a structure that has a bit of a wiggle in it, when that structure moves laterally, you create an open zone here, and that's where the fluids go. So it would be vertical, not horizontal, but that's where the fluids get a chance to move. And so I would expect in the gold zone much greater lengths than 50 to 80 meters.
And by the way, just to understand it, so these 350 meters, that is down dip, right?
Correct. It's like this. That's a ruler. That's your 30 to 80 meter distance. That's your 2 meter distance, and this is your 150. So it's sitting in there like this along a fracture, and
sometimes it varies.
They're spaced about 100 to 150 meters apart.
Okay, and you need to find this, because other than that, it could be like 2 centimeters, 10 centimeters, but then it widens out to.
Correct, and that the narrow zone between the Oreshoots might have a little speck of silver in it here or there, but mostly it's just calcite. The one thing about that calcite, though, is that calcite contains some metals that make it fluorescent. So you can use an ultraviolet light to recognize which are those productive calcite veins and use that to trace yourself to the next Oreshoot.
So in other words, so with this exploration program, as you said, in September this year, you had an impressive intercept, and for the viewers, it was 9 meters of 660 grams per ton silver. Do you think that you have found the right methodology, or sort of, and you could rinse in the piece to find more of these Oreshoots?
Well, that's certainly what we're hoping. Because we take an ore systems or district scale approach to our exploration. When you find something that works, you don't necessarily just keep hammering it in the same place, because you don't know whether you actually have already found the best part of the system or not. So when you're exploring an entire system, you're going to scatter your drill holes around to determine which are the most favorable zones. And then once you understand that, that's when you start going in and try to drill off a resource. And, we're still a good distance away from being able to drill off a resource. Obviously, 9 meters of 600 grams is a good place to start. You wouldn't complain about having a resource that had that kind of grade. But again, we've got a number of favorable parts in that district, and we'd like to see if our methodology is finding us. Let me just put it this way. I would rather find 2 meters of 2% silver than, which would be 4 kilos per ton. 40 kilos per ton versus 9 meters of 600.
One final question regarding Batopilas. Would you say that you have made a discovery at Batopilas?
I would say we've made a couple of discoveries at Batopilas. First of all, the recognition of the gold component there is a major game changer for that district. And we need follow-up drilling, but 9 meters of 600 grams or the 20 centimeters of 5 kilos that we've hit in another hole, both of those, to me, are telling us that we're in the right place. We think we've found a methodology that lets us find the productive structures. And that's an early stage discovery. If you have to wait till you have a mine to call it a discovery, most geologists are long gone by that. Mining engineers have taken over and kicked us out a long time before.
What is your or Reyna's average drilling cost per meter in Mexico, roughly?
Yeah, well, it's a pretty cheap, I guess, according to the times. But you can have rates from $150 until the cheapest, and $200 per meter, the highest, in my experience. All inclusive.
Okay, that's very competitive, and that's US dollars.
Yes, US dollars.
You had some impressive drill results this year, especially hole 57 and 58 at the Batopilas. What did you learn from this drilling program at the Batopilas?
So what we've learned at Batopilas is that this combination of the systematic review that we did in the last year with the structural work, with the sampling work, with the geophysics, and combining those and identifying these sort of stacked anomalies has allowed us to find a blind vein. And this is a new native silver vein. And the features that we see in it say, okay, you're getting close to one of those famous Oreshoots. It's one of the features that you see as you're kind of vectoring in before it blows out. So that's a big discovery or big breakthrough for us in terms of that possibility. We now need to follow that up with identifying which direction we need to move. And then in addition to that, one of the big questions at Batopilas, and what 58 answered in many ways, is if mineralization didn't crop out on surface, is there potential that there's major mineralization that was left behind or was not yet discovered? And at hole 58, starting just 3 meters from surface, we have that 30 meters of silver mineralization with 9 meters running over 600 grams. So there's our evidence that there's potential for that. And that's particularly important because many of the stacked anomalies that we saw as part of that systematic rethink, those are showing up underneath cover. So we did hole 57, testing it where we think we had the highest chance for initial success. But there are additional targets that we can go after once we can better refine our understanding of how to vector into these Oreshoots.
At Batopilas, when could you just add some color to how you're thinking in terms of actually defining a resource and when it potentially would make sense to define one?
Yeah, so I would say two things regarding, defining a resource. One of the aspects for Reyna Silver is because of the depth of experience from the team in terms of going from discovery into production is understanding that if you jump too early into a resource, you box yourself in. You take out some of the blue sky potential for a project, and it becomes defined by that earlier resource. One of the components that we do is what you can almost think of as sketching things out. So we start out really big in terms of how we define the project. So we're making those 500-meter step outs. We're, at our CRD projects because we're trying to delineate a big system. And you can then later fill in that more information with shading and coloring as you make your way forward. So, all of our projects are earlier stage exploration. They're pre-major discovery. And I think in large part what we discover at them, how big those projects end up being, will determine that timeline. Batopilas would probably be, one of the earlier, if we made a discovery tomorrow at Batopilas, magically, we started drilling. We hit, one of the Oreshoots. Focus would tune towards that and we'd end up, moving that project towards a resource. But it's hard to identify which one that would be right now. Gryphon, if we're at all right about that project, this is kind of the case with any of them. By going after high grade, by going after big scale, it's either the type of project you'd want to take into production yourself, or it's the ideal project for a big company to come and take over. Because they're not looking for little projects. You look at the silver companies with a market cap of over $1 billion, they can all do about 10 million ounces a year. The question is how few projects you can do that in, because that reduces your overhead. Each mine's a headache. So when you have those multiple projects, or when you have fewer projects or projects of scale, that reduces that. And that's the kind of projects that the big companies are looking for. And that's the kind of projects that we're exploring for, because that's what can also be a company maker in its own right.
Where else would you like to follow up in the next drilling program?
Well, as told you, we coming back into the southwest part of the area, close to the one of the two famous veins, Todos Santos and Escritorio veins, which are 300 meters separated each other. And we hit in this year and a blind vein with a strong silver grade. And we are trying to coming back to explore that area because it's a potential new area. Even there's into the two of the more famous veins historically. Apparently, the people exploring the veins when they can see the outcrops of that veins. But if some veins are blinded, it's difficult to them to do that. We spend a lot of time doing money doing geophysics and structural studies, and we have the support to keep explore that kind of areas in order to looking for more.
I mean, you're a Mexican native, and how often are you on site at both Batopilas and also Guigui?
On Guigui, which is pretty close to Chihuahua City where I live, obviously, I used to be every day when we are drilling. And when are doing another kind of researching, I used to go 2 or 3 times a week. So it's pretty easy to me to get that, and I like it and enjoy it. Batopilas is a little bit more far from Chihuahua. You had to drive 6-7 hours, and but rather than is kind of a time-consuming traveling there. We had working there another guy who has been part of the team for years for Minera Cascabel, is Manuel Ruiz, and he's an excellent geologist. He has been working Batopilas for before for Max Silver a couple of years, and after with Reyna Silver. So I feel pretty support and confident with Manuel regarding the job.
So with that, I think we should move to your second Mexican asset or project, Guigui. Could you describe Guigui for the viewers?
Okay, so Guigui is the missing half in terms of our model of what is historically one of the world's 2 or 3 biggest carbonate replacement deposits. So the historic Santa Eulalia district produced over 500 million ounces of silver at a grade of better than 10 ounces with 15% combined lead and zinc. It was found in outcrop in the mid-1600s, and mineralization was basically just followed from there for 5 kilometers laterally and as much as a kilometer, 1.2 kilometers vertically. But when we look at the model, we don't see any skarn in there. We don't see the intrusion that drove it, the porphyry. Barren probably, but still there's a porphyritic intrusion somewhere driving that system. And so the basic thesis is if half of the system is one of the world's great carbonate replacement systems, the other half of the system, which is what we're looking for, could be potentially as economically important as the half that's already been found. And so what we're looking for is that porphyry that drove that system so that we can then explore sort of both ends against the middle. We know where the outboard part of the system is, the distal part, we call it. Now we need the proximal part, which is where it all came from. And then we can explore between those two. And one of the beauties of where we're exploring is that we have a 1,200 meter thick section of some of the most favorable limestone for carbonate replacement that's ever been seen. And there's known mineralization that goes from the bottom of that section all the way to the top. So we know it's productive and favorable through that whole volume of rock. And we're drilling for the intrusion at depth within that sequence, but we're seeing indications that there may be more of that style of mineralization that was mined historically higher in the section. So we think the intrusion's probably down around a kilometer below the surface, but we've got that whole thickness of limestone to work with. And if we can find the massive sulfide in that section, and this is an area where everything is covered by pre-mineral volcanic rocks, so they're altered, but they didn't host mineralization. So we have to look through that cover to see what's in the limestone below. And we're getting some indications that we're near some big replacement bodies too. So we have sort of two main exploration focuses in terms of the style of mineralization that we're looking for.
Okay, so you're trying to find the barren porphyry, and then you're also trying to find the second half, which would be also the distal part, which is where the high-grade massive sulfide is.
Really what we're looking for is the skarn surrounding that, the high temperature alteration and the big volume mineralization surrounding the porphyry intrusion. That's the principal target. But if we get high-grade massive replacement mineralization on our way there, then that's beyond gravy. That's a twofer. two for the
And
price.
massive replacement mineralization, is that the same as where the massive sulfide with
Yes.
galena, slarite?
Correct. Yep.
And what mineral did host the silver? Galena is
Most
lead sulfide?
in that district, most of the silver is in the galena.
Okay. But I would actually like to move on to Guigui. So could you summarize the work that has been done on Guigui?
Yeah, I've been involved in Guigui since 2010, more or less, with keep following the things that Max Silver is starting to do in 2003. And has been several drilling stages. I've been part of the last one. I mean, in 2015, I be in charge of the drilling campaign for Max Silver in that time. Anyways, the budget in the early stages are, I mean, small budget, just to drill 3,000 meters per campaign in one of them. And but since we were involved with Reyna Silver, the budget has been pretty more bigger, and actually with Reyna Silver we have drilled almost 20,000 meters into drilling campaigns that we has been pretty successful, and obviously we found more things in comparison with the earlier drilling campaigns. Right now, we found some bleeders structures who could be taking us back to the source, which is the object of this campaign, and as well a depth. I mean, 1,200,000 meters depth. We found 60 meters, almost 60 meters skarnification with a typical grace and typical texture of the skarn. So it's telling us that we are right in our vectoring to the source in that part.
How are you going? What is the strategy for vectoring into the source of the deposit?
Well, obviously, Peter Megaw has been studying that deposit since, I don't know, 40 years ago. And obviously, the inputs of Peter studying the West Camp mineralization, all historical mineralization style, is showing us that the source of that mineralization, who is manto and chimneys, is pointing to the southeast, if you want, and same with the East Camp, where the San Antonio mine is located. Then the vectoring, according to the feature of that kind of deposit, pointed out to the south directly. So we are the two vectoring pointing out to the southeast, and remember that our almost 5,000 hectares claim package is pretty well located, covering the two arrows, if you want, arrows of vectoring from the West Camp and East Camp. We control the middle camp, which is the part, strategical part, to where the supposedly one or the other one or the two of the vectoring direction is trying to joining together in our Guigui claim package.
So with that, we'll move on to your third project, or Medicine Springs, up in Nevada. So could you describe Medicine Springs for the viewers?
So Medicine Springs is a property that was brought to Jorge by a very accomplished geologist from Nevada. And what we recognized at Medicine Springs was there had been a fair amount of work done focused on shallow, fairly low-grade oxidized silver mineralization. that was associated with a series of structures that were very well developed across the property, had typical carbonate replacement style of alteration called jasperoid, which is what happens when instead of replacing limestone with sulfides, you replace it with fine-grained quartz or silica. And we could recognize these ribs of jasperoid running for kilometers across the property, just like almost like stone walls running across the property. And the first time I saw it, I was really impressed by the volume of jasperoid, the structural controls, and the fact that you could get as much as 1 kilogram silver in samples from those jasperoids. And that's a remarkably high silver content to get in a system. So we're talking about from the very beginning, we recognized the system was at least 3 by 5 kilometers in terms of its overall footprint. And within that, we had a whole series of mineralized structures that we could sample systematically. We did that, got about 650 samples taken. And then when we looked at the geochemistry, we saw this zoning from copper to zinc to silver and lead. And you go, that's the classic zoning that you should expect to see. And it tells us that the porphyry is probably under the cover, just off of the edge of the hills that where we have outcrops. So you come off the hills and you're into a typical Nevada basin where it's just a lot of young gravels that are covering the surface. So it's like Cinco de Mayo. You don't have any exposure out there, so you have to use geophysics and your geologic reasoning to figure out where to target. And at this point, we've put 10 or 15 holes into Medicine Springs. First thing we wanted to do was make sure we had enough thickness of limestone to be worth exploring in. And we've got at least 1,000 meters of limestone. So we're very happy with the section that we've got. We hit high-grade silver in a number of holes in these structures that are controlling the jasperoids. And so now the goal is to follow that back towards the porphyry source. And we've done some geophysics that gives us an idea where that may be out under the cover. So again, we're trying to understand this entire system. We'll obviously be very happy if we drill into big wide zone of massive mineralization. But that's not necessarily the first goal. The first goal is to make sure that all the pieces are there. And then once we know that and know how the pieces fit together, that should lead us to discover.
How could you effectively vector into the porphyry deposit? I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, you said geophysics. I know that you have been doing some magnetotelluric service.
Yes, and so the geophysics that we use, we don't expect to see the mineralization directly with the geophysics. What we hope to see with the geophysics is the intrusion, the porphyry that's driving things, and the carbonates, the favorable host rock section, and the structures that cut through it. And magnetotelluric geophysics does a very good job of recognizing horizontal and or flat-lying and high-angle discontinuities. So the horizontal ones being differences in the stratigraphic section, the vertical ones being the structures that cut through, that fed the mineralization, and then the intrusion itself, where you hope to see the intrusion and maybe some of the thermal effects around it, depending on the types of rock that it's placed in. So to vector in that, we can vector with where we have surface exposure, and we see the classic pattern from silver to lead to zinc to the beginning of copper, which is telling us we're getting close to the copper zone. Then we go into cover, but the geophysics is telling us, it's maybe 0.5 kilometer out under the cover to where the intrusive source is. So those are the pieces you put together to try to understand the district as a whole. The first thing says, go that way. That's what the geochemistry of the alteration does. And then the geophysics says, go down here, because this is where we think the intrusive center is.
Could you describe Gryphon?
So what Gryphon was known for historically And that's in the late 19th and early 20th century. What they mined there was classic high silver carbonate replacement mineralization. So the mountain that contains the Gryphon Summit project is a big pile of carbonate rocks. So it's the same kind of host rocks that we look for in any CRD. So, and we know historically that they mined high-grade CRD there. So that's one style of mineralization. That's what people focused on over 100 years ago. Then starting in the 1960s and 70s, people began to recognize what we now know as Carlin-type gold mineralization. That's the reason why Nevada, and this particular part of Nevada where Gryphon Springs is one of the world's great gold camps. It's produced, I forget how many 100 millions of ounces of gold coming out of that neighborhood. So there was, once people recognized what Carlin deposits were, what they thought they were, because originally people thought Carlin deposits were a very near surface type of deposit, that they formed at or just barely below the surface. That's what people thought prior to the late 80s or early 90s. And during that time, people went out and they explored all the areas they could get to around the Carlin area, so near Elko, which is where Gryphon Springs is, and or Gryphon Summit rather. So a lot of work was done out there. Sampling was done. They found some gold mineralization and they drilled shallow holes, because if you expect that the deposit formed at the surface, you don't need to drill deep. So most of the drilling that was done on the Gryphon project was less than 100 meters. So very shallow drilling. They got some interesting numbers in those holes. And interesting, in some of those holes, they also got strong indications of CRD type mineralization. And that kind of thing got picked up by one optioner of the property after another. So we got it from some guys who recognized the potential more than 30 years ago and began to put the property together. And then they optioned it to these gold exploration companies who came in and did shallow focused exploration looking for where they thought Carlin deposits needed to be. Now, we now recognize that Carlin deposits can go 1,000 meters or more depth. So, and they get bigger and they get higher grade with depth. So it does all the right things. So if what you've got is a bunch of shallow drilling where you've left all of that deep potential behind, and you have indications of where to go deep based on what was found up near the surface, it gives you a tremendous amount of information to base your exploration on. There was a major, the last major that was in the property was focused a little deeper. They drilled their holes to about 250 meters. But again, they were very gold focused, and they got some very good lead, zinc, silver CRD style mineralization in their drilling. But because they were only focused on gold, they walked away. They left us with that information. At least one of their holes was left in pretty high grade mineralization. But because it's silver, lead, zinc, and they were looking for gold, they didn't care. So we get to pick up on, that might actually be a discovery hole. We don't know yet because it was left in mineralization. So it's a big property. It's more than 10,000 hectares. It covers most of the Diablo Range. There's big ripping structures that run through this mountain that have alteration along them that has been selectively sampled, and you see silver, lead, zinc, copper, gold, all on those structures, probably from different events. Some of that is from the plumbing that was, it's like Batopilas again. It's the plumbing was used early for the CRD type mineralization, and then it was reactivated with a later geologic event that brought in the gold mineralization. But when you look at the map of the geochemistry, you see these multi-kilometer long strings of anomalous samples in all those different metals. And the first thing you notice is that there are very few breaks. There's very few breaks in those continuous structures. So that's telling you that there isn't a lot of post-mineral structural deformation. So if there's mineralization there, it should still be continuous. It shouldn't be broken up by a lot of post-mineral faulting, which is very good for the mining of the thing. And all of this stuff is just showing up on the surface, and there's almost no drilling to a depth that we would expect a big CRD or even a big Carlin to lie at. So both exploration models exist to apply to the property, and they're superimposed on each other. So again, you have high-grade silver, lead, zinc mineralization that has a gold sweetener on it, and that could be multiple grams of gold. And at current prices, a gram of gold is worth more than $60. It's pushing $70 a gram. So you throw a gram or two in there, $100, $150 of sweetener on top of everything, your all-in mining costs probably less than $100 a ton. So the gold itself covers the cost of operations. The silver, lead, zinc is free. Or you can look at it the other way. The lead and zinc, if they're rich enough, they probably cover the cost of operations, and the silver and gold is free. But the beauty of a system that's high grade like that is you know that there's something that's going to keep the mine profitable under almost any economic conditions. So you could sleep at night when times are bad, and then with elevated metal prices, you're making buckets of money, and then you can party all night if that's what you choose to do.
You will be relogging cores and doing a new 43-101 technical report at Gryphon, and from my understanding, you will be, or from our conversations previously, you will be involved in relogging that core. So what will you be looking for in particular?
That's one of the beauties of acquiring a property that's got 30 years of exploration or more than that on it, for which we have most of the data. So, we have to bring things up to modern standards. We need our eyeballs on the core, because this core was all logged by people who cared about Carlin gold. So they didn't pay attention to the alteration features we expect to see related to the CRD stage of mineralization. So there's potential for finding skarn. There's potential for finding what we call fugitive calcite, which is the calcite that is the exhaust of the replacement process, which we can use to track back to where it came from. We'll just be, we'll bring a team of people who are experienced with carbonate replacement deposits to look at the core. At the same time, we've brought in people who are experts in Carlin. So we'll learn what they think matters. They'll learn what we think matters. And with luck, we'll be able to separate the two and get a little bit of an idea of geochemically how we can separate one stage from the other. It's a little like unbaking a cake, because once the ingredients have all gone in, you can tell, well, the cake has gold and silver, but I don't know whether the gold came in with the flour or it came in with the baking soda. But these are, it's exciting to have literally millions of dollars worth of other people's drilling that they didn't know how to read. They didn't know how to read the core the same way we do. I'm not saying that they didn't read the core right. The rocks only answer the questions you ask them. We know different questions to ask the rocks. And so we don't have to do this from scratch. We get to do this from more than 100 drill holes that we get to work with. And that's a huge advantage.
If your thesis for Gryphon plays out and it eventually becomes a mine at some point in the future, what kind of sort of mine would it be? An high grade, relatively large underground operation, or could you just add some color to that?
Well, I think that there's been enough drilling, at least in parts of Gryphon, so that the chances of there being something open pittable is pretty small. Now, there could still be some surprises there. That part of Nevada is very favorable for open pit mining. But I think it's much more probable that it will be an underground operation, which I actually prefer because the environmental footprint is much smaller for an underground mine than for a big open pit mine. So I would expect it to be a high-grade underground operation of some kind. How big, I don't know until we figure out what's there. But I would expect that it would be multiple thousands of tons a day if it's an important discovery that we make there. So selective, high-grade underground mining.
Thank you. And now I've actually arrived at my final question. I mean, you have 4 projects, and today, how would you rank your projects in terms of priority?
Well, I think each project has its own priority, because they're all at different stages. Because of how recently we've acquired Gryphon and how long we've watched it. I mean, I've been in and out of Gryphon for more than 25 years. I really like what I see there. And we have all of this data that we can work with for very low cost during a time of year when it's not easy to work in the field. It gets snowy in that part of Nevada, so you can't really do field work. But we have all of this drilling that needs to be logged. So that's priority for moving Gryphon forward. Do that, get the independent 43101 study done so we can talk about the historic drilling that's been done. We can talk about the drilling that's been done in the last couple of years because it's very recent. The exchange lets you do that. But for the more historical information, we have to bring that into a 43101 so we can talk about it. So Gryphon gets that priority just because it's inexpensive and there's a very high potential for learning a lot, perhaps maybe even finding a discovery already in the existing drilling. For Medicine Springs, it's a question of a permit to get out and put some holes in for where we think the intrusion is. So it's pretty easy. Again, there's snow that gets in the way. It's hard to get in and out of Medicine Springs in the wintertime. So, it will sort of sit fallow. We'll be thinking about the results that we got from last year, and planning the program there. As far as the deposits and the projects in Mexico are concerned, it's a good time of year to work in Mexico. Politically in Mexico right now, they have an election coming up next June. And so the projects in Mexico will probably move slowly until we see which direction the politics in Mexico are going. We have every reason to think that regardless of who wins the election, the only thing we know for sure about the election in Mexico is the next president of Mexico will be a woman, which will be for the first time. And that's a very good thing. And either one of them is likely to be more favorable towards mining than the current administration in Mexico. So the best thing to do in Mexico right now is keep your head down until you see which way the election's going to go, and then put the wheels back on and really start to move those projects. We know exactly what we need to do at Guigui. We know exactly what we need to do next at Batopilas. It's just a question of external factors coming into order for moving forward.
Could you walk us through Reyna Silver's capital structure?
So just to tell you a little bit about our capital structure, as of today, we have 188 million shares outstanding, and then on a fully diluted basis, 202 million. And this is on the back of a financing that we just closed about, I would say, 3 weeks ago. And, it was as everybody knows, 3 weeks ago was kind of a difficult time to do a financing. But the market has moved surprisingly the last couple of, I would say that really the last 5 trading days. So our share price has moved up quite dramatically, I would say, from in the last 5-6 days. We closed yesterday, I believe, at 22 cents. Our last financing was on at 13 cents. So, one interesting thing about our capital structure, of course, is, we have 20-cent warrants, which are now in the money. And that's obviously just something for me to point out to everyone. I think those are the main things to point out regarding our capital structure.
With that, I would actually like to move on to capital allocation. And you're a capital allocator, so how are you thinking in terms of capital allocation? What projects will you prioritize next year?
Absolutely. So, for next year, we have a very interesting situation, which is we've taken a new project that's very exciting to us. It's called Gryphon. It's a little bit north of a company called I-80, in Nevada. It's a company that has had some exceptional CRD mineralization results in the last few months. Last week, they also had some incredibly high-grade gold results for anybody who's interested in looking at their press release. Gryphon is a few kilometers north from that project and exhibiting very similar geological features. So we think we acquired the project on an option agreement. The project comes with close to 12,000 meters of drilling. It comes with an incredible amount of geophysics, different types of geophysics, close to 4,000 surface samples. So in terms of data, this really is a project that has the most data. So especially early in the year, like say Q1 and Q2, this project will become the main focus in the company. Now, with that said, Jasper, we do have drill targets ready on our other three projects, Medicine Springs, Guigui, and Batopilas. So, we're going to see how the market behaves and what essentially, how things go. But at the moment, for the first quarter of the year, our main focus will be at Gryphon.
Are you holding off on your Mexican projects until the election is over? And I think it's holding 2nd of June next year.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Jasper. We're not particularly worried about the election per se. So, we would feel comfortable going and drilling. I don't think there's anything that will be unexpected, especially for a company like ours that's drilling underground exploration. I really don't think there's anything in the horizon that will hamper our projects. But so from the operations side, we actually feel very comfortable with Mexico. However, there is a bit of a declining sentiment from investors, and we have seen that companies that only have assets in Mexico, their market cap has suffered a little bit more than some of their peers. So we do have the election in July of next year. It's very soon, and I think more to do with the sentiment than the reality of us being worried about the jurisdiction. I think we do think it's prudent to just wait until after the election. My feeling, Jasper, is regardless of whether for those people who don't know too much about Mexican elections, the current president is not eligible for re-election, so it's the ruling party versus the opposition. I think either candidate will be more friendly to mining than the current president, and even in this environment that is certainly less favorable than has been in the past, it's still an incredible jurisdiction for mining. You still get things done in time, and again, going back to my earlier point, the geological endowment is really incredible. So we're still big believers in Mexico, and at the same time, it just worked out perfectly that we have the opportunity of drilling this project in the beginning of the year.
So what is the drilling cost, both in Mexico and in Nevada?
Yeah, so
All in
for Mexico is anywhere from 120 to 180 Canadian. That is largely determined by whether it's Batopilas or Guigui, and that's the range that we have drilled so far, including the higher drilling prices of 180 that was in 2021. Nevada, on the other hand, is significantly more expensive. Almost 3 to 4 times that. However, because there's less drilling happening as lithium sort of coming off, as well as less robust drilling projects for other junior companies in Nevada for the upcoming summer, the prices have significantly dropped below 300, or at least the bids so far have come in below 300 Canadian all in for the 2024 programs.
It's every junior's dream to get a strategic investor, and when I'm speaking of strategic investor, I mean a larger mining company come in at a premium, and so you don't have to raise money at a bought deal discounts. So how are, I mean, do you have any CAs with larger mining companies, and could you add some color to the discussions that you may be having?
So right now what we're doing is, with strategics, you don't want to be opening that door last minute, right? You want to be developing those relationships, developing, conversations and getting that started on the front side, because you can always tell them no. It's very hard to start those conversations, or puts you in a strategic disadvantage to start those conversations post-discovery. So we're beginning that process. We've been in conversation with a couple of different majors who have us on their radar. But at this point, it's not something I can directly talk about which companies those are. But it is something that we always keep an eye on, making sure that we remain dynamic, because that's how you best protect your investors and your capital.
We don't have to name any specific company, or we can't name any specific companies, but I would still like to push a little bit on that. So what type of company, I mean, size, market cap, also type of metals, jurisdictions could be interested in Reyna? So,
one thing, for instance, that I can talk about is people are really interested in the copper component at Medicine Springs. Particularly with the geophysics anomaly lining up with the structures and structures, geophysics, geochem, because of the potential for copper-bearing porphyries in Utah and Nevada. I mean, 90 kilometers south of us in Nevada, we have the Robinson-Ely porphyry system. So historically, carbonate replacement deposit. Driving that is a big copper porphyry that's been in production for 50 years, over 50 years. So big copper porphyry there. One of the things that they're looking at down in the Eureka district is, where's the porphyry driver for that, particularly because of some of the copper mineralization that they're running into there. And I think a lot of majors, we're talking the big names in Nevada, the companies that end up on the top 10 list for large mining companies, they have copper mandates. And so companies that look like they have the potential for a large-scale potent system, so like Medicine Springs, where we're seeing 7 out of 9 structures carrying high-grade mineralization, that tells you that you have a long-lived, juicy, potent system. That's what you need to get a big porphyry too, in the same way that's what you need to get a big CRD. And I think that's part of what is putting, Medicine Springs on people's radar. The zinc component that we have at Gryphon as well as Guigui definitely have some eyes. And I think Batopilas, the attraction there is the crazy high-grade mineralization for companies that are focused on, being primary silver companies. We'll see, what any of these relationships could turn into, but it's the start of the conversations. It's making sure there's engagement and making sure that, when we have news or releases, we're keeping those companies apprised, and we'll see where it goes.
By that, we have actually already arrived at the final question.
Yep.
And that is, so I mean, you started the company, you're the CEO. So where do you envision Reyna Silver in 5 years?
5 years. Look, we want to make a discovery, and we want to make a discovery that really moves the needle. I think if I can compare it to some of the recent discoveries, Western Alaska, Hercules Silver, two discoveries that really were based on doing really good geological work, developing good targets. I think we have all the ingredients. We have the right team. We have the right projects, the right jurisdiction. We're doing everything in the right way. So really to make a discovery, and when I was just with Lauren a couple of weeks ago, Lauren Megaw, who I think also will be interviewed for these series, and we were talking about how we have 4 projects that really have that potential. That part is very exciting. So if I look 5 years from now, if we could make 4 discoveries, obviously that would be amazing. And maybe a little bit wishful thinking, but even if we can just have one world-class discovery, that would be it would be amazing. Typically the path for a company like ours is you get bought out by a big company. I mean, I think you saw just with that one hole at Hercules Silver, Barrick has come in a big way. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do that, and hopefully not in 5 years, hopefully much sooner than that.